So with that, Dr. Roger Cruz, Associate Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences, is going to be talking about one path to follow from this. This is the Ford Foundation Fellowships Program. So with that, I turn it over to Dr. Cruz. Thank you.
Let's kick this off. All right, so as Dr. Harris said, I am Robert Cruz. I'm the Associate Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences and also Director of Graduate Studies in the college. This role that I've had in the last 7 years. And one of my primary roles is to help students to get to the point of actually leaving us. That's kind of the whole point, right? You don't want to stay here forever. You want to obviously get your degree, move on with your life, and that's obviously our goal as well to help you do that. I do want to take a moment to just tell you how lucky you are to have a program like this. That what Dr. Harris has done here is really quite astonishing, I think, because I'm not aware of really any other school that are doing anything like this, really trying to provide support from the library for the mission of helping students to complete their dissertation. That's really a wonderful thing, and I think there's going to be a great deal of support from the colleges for this as well. It really is a wonderful program. I want to thank Peggy Callahan for being here today, because Peggy will be, for a brief period of time in your lives, one of your best friends. It's going to be this very weird relationship where she's going to be really important to you, but only for a very brief period of time. So, but be very nice to her. She's going to be really important, and she's trying to help you. So do what Peggy says, and you'll be in good shape. So be aware of that as well. So you're probably all at different points in this journey of completing the doctorate. Some of you may be just starting to get ready to write a dissertation. Some of you are actually in the process right now of writing this document. And some of you may actually be in the process of finishing up and graduating quite soon. So I want to talk very broadly for a moment about all those things, because there are a few things in your life, like writing a dissertation. It can be a very exciting process, because hopefully you're writing about something that really engages you, really captures your interest, and you're becoming the world's expert in your area, which is a very exciting thing. At the same time, there's also a very scary prospect, because it involves many hours sitting by yourself, alone in a room, in front of a blank computer screen, and you have to actually put great thoughts onto this blank canvas and try to actually create a very long and involved document with all kinds of formatting restrictions that you'll find out about as you're doing this from the website from Peggy. So it really is can be a very lonely process. I think most people going through their dissertation often feel like they're kind of doing it by themselves. Advisors vary a great deal in terms of how hands-on they are. Some advisors are really helpful and kind of are giving you guidance every step of the way. They're available. And quite frankly, some advisors are less than those things. They provide help if they're asked, they aren't necessarily proactive, and you kind of have to go to them and kind of push them to get the information that you need. So a wide variety of different kinds of advisors. And once again, that's one of the great things about having this DWR program, is that you're going to find out that there are other people just like you on this campus who are going through the exact same things. And being able to turn to them for support, for guidance, that just for a pep talk sometimes, can be a really, really helpful thing. So I think that's just great that this program exists and it's being done this way. So what I want to talk about during my part of the presentation today is to tell you some really good news. There are people out in the world who would like to give you money. That's always good news, right? The problem is they don't know who you are. And so to get that money that they'd like to give to you, you have to jump through certain hoops. You have to apply for the money through a variety of mechanisms that exist for this. I'm going to be talking today mostly about the Ford Foundation program for doing this, although much of what I'm going to say applies to many other fellowship programs of this type. So a lot of what I say would transfer to other kinds of programs you might be applying for. The dean of my college, Dean Abby Pirrell, asked me to make this presentation today because she's become aware that very few students at this university are actually applying for these kinds of awards. The Ford Foundation has given out over 4,000 of these fellowships over the last 70 years. And I did a quick check on their website. We've only had 2 from the University of Memphis, and they weren't recent either. They were actually several years ago. So it's kind of like that great quote by the hockey player Wayne Gretzky: "You miss 100% of the shots you don't take." And yes, these programs are very competitive, but if you don't apply for them, you have 0 chance of getting them. So it really is important to be aware that the programs exist and then to actually go through the process of applying for them. The timing for this is actually quite good because the award I'm talking about today, the deadlines for them is in December. And so you've got a couple of months basically to do this if you decide to apply for them. I was thinking, gee, maybe I should talk about this at the beginning of the semester. The problem is if you do it too early, people get busy, they kind of forget. This is probably the ideal time to be thinking about this because in a couple of months you would have time to put together a proposal and go through the necessary stages for being able to apply for these deadlines. And I'm going to be showing you slides from the Ford Foundation. I'm going to send out all these slides to the graduate students on campus after this talk today. I'll give them to Dr. Harris as well on the website. So you have to take any notes. It's all going to be available to you after the talk today. So be aware of that as well. Well, I've gone through those slides and made some annotations added a little bit right at the end. So but once again, this applies very generally, not just the Ford Foundation, but to many other fellowship programs that you might apply for. Oops. Here we go. Okay. So the Ford Foundation, that name should probably tell you where the money's coming from. It's Henry Ford started this program back in the 1930s, so it's actually been around for a very long time. And once again, they give over 4,000 awards over the last several decades. And one of the primary things they're trying to do with this particular foundation of money is to increase the ethnic and racial diversity of people who are becoming and joining academia. So traditionally, of course, there have been many groups that are underrepresented in academia. And so this, the primary, not the sole, but the primary goal of this program has been to try to increase this diversity for people going into academic careers. Like many programs of this type, there are lots of benefits to these fellowships. So in a moment, I'm going to talk about the actual money part of this, which is probably what you want to hear about, the stipends that are available. And they do vary according to the programs that make up the Ford Foundation. But they also really, in a very important way, foster connection between fellows. They have a conference of Ford Fellows that they hold every year. I'll say more about that in a moment. But it's a great way of being able to kind of network with people who are at the same point in their careers as you would be. There's also a network of former Ford Foundation fellows who are happy to provide support. So it's kind of plugging you into a whole new network. And that's one of the really important things, both in business and academia, is being networked, knowing other people, meeting other people, because those people can be a great help to you in your career as it moves forward. So there's actually this directory of Ford Fellows you can go to, and that's how I know we've had two University of Memphis Ford Fellows. So you can search the directory by location, by name, by institution, and find out who these people are and what kinds of projects they have done over the years with this program. This conference is actually quite a great experience. It allows all kinds of, well, since we're face-to-face, And I'm sure that they're hoping it's going to be face to face. Everything right now, of course, is conditional. We don't know, where things are going to be a year from now. But ideally, the idea is that you be able to meet and network with these people. You'd be able to maybe identify mentors for your career. There are workshops on writing and career advancement. And then for those who are pre-doctoral or going through their dissertation, actual strategies to help them complete and to think about the long-term planning of an academic career. So for those of you who are planning to or thinking about going into academia, keep in mind that your career goes across several decades. It's not just kind of a one year plan. You really kind of want to have a plan for your entire career, and you can start thinking about those things by interacting with people in a similar situation at these conferences. There's also advice you get at these conferences having to do with creating grant proposals, finding places that actually will fund kind of research that you do. There are both spoken and poster presentations that are made during the conference. And once again, you really have a chance to interact with a very wide array of other scholars. So one of the things about graduate school that you end up with a very narrow focus. You're working on a very specific project within one department, within one college of the university. But of course, there are people just like you across all the departments, across all the colleges. And these kinds of conferences remind you, in fact, that there are lots of different people and lots of different programs who are working towards either completing their PhD or have just completed their PhD. And so it gives you kind of a broader sense of the range of disciplines that exist in academia. So the idea is that people who receive for foundation support have this opportunity to come to the conference during their first year of support. And then, pending space and funding availability, you can go a second time onto this as well. And once again, this is all paid for by the Ford Foundation. Your airfare, that it's face to face, which we're hoping it will be next year, hotel, all those kinds of expenses are paid for by the foundation. So it's a really nice event that Ford makes it possible for their fellows. So you're probably thinking, well, this sounds pretty good. Am I eligible? And the Ford Foundation has some very specific eligibility rules. They're kind of amazingly precise about exactly who can apply for this. I highlighted the most important part of this, or the most typical situation for most people. All U.S. citizens, nationals, and permanent residents can apply. And then there are some additional categories of folks who can also apply for this as well. And obviously, there are criteria that are important in being successful when applying for this. So assuming that you have done well in terms of your coursework in graduate school, have a high GPA is obviously going to be a helpful criterion to be eligible for this kind of honor, this kind of award. And then crucially, what the Ford Foundation is trying to do is to help people who are trying to establish careers in both teaching and research at colleges and universities across the country. So it really is the case that what Ford is trying to do for a number of years now is really try to give assistance at a point when most people really kind of need it the most. You are probably as broke right now as you've ever been in your lives. You're probably dealing with loans and things like that. It's all very scary because it's like this never ends. So you have to go through all these kinds of difficult financial adjustments to be a graduate student and finish. And Ford is trying to offer some assistance in this way because getting to that point, being able to move into a career at a university or a college is actually something that they want to foster and see people be successful at doing it, and trying to help financially goes a long way toward that. There are three kinds of awards And different parts are going to be interesting to different parts of the audience. I'll go through all three of them. There are predoctoral awards for people who are kind of just beginning their doctoral careers or are midway through. There are dissertation awards for people who are currently completing the dissertation. And there are also postdoctoral awards that support people immediately after having graduated from their institution. So predoctoral, dissertation, and postdoctoral. And they all are different programs and work a bit differently. So I have slides for each of these parts. So this is the first one, predoctoral eligibility. And there are some rules about this. You can't have a prior PhD. That kind of makes sense. And you have to be enrolled at an eligible institution as of fall 2022. Once again, that probably doesn't apply to very many of you who are probably more advanced in your doctoral careers right now. But for people who get it, it's actually very nice. It's $27,000 stipend per year for 3 years. So even if this doesn't really apply to you, you might want to mention it to other students in the program, other students in your advisory lab, because they might be able to apply for the first, second year of graduate study. This would be a really good idea for them to apply for this funding. It really is designed to make it much easier to get through graduate school without going into a huge amount of debt. This is a really nice thing to be able to cushion the financial hardships that go along with being a doctoral student. So that's the predoctoral fellowship program. Then we have the program that probably is more relevant to most of you right now. So you've gotten through most undergraduate career, and now you're working on your dissertation. And the Ford Foundation is a separate fund for this level. So once again, you can't have already gotten a PhD. That kind of goes without saying. And then once again, you have to be enrolled at an eligible institution. And of course, the University of Memphis is one of those. And this is the crucial part in terms of fine print. By December of this year, you have to have completed all of your other requirements. You have to be what's often referred to as ABD, all but done. That's all the dissertation. So you did your coursework, you're working on your dissertation. So that all has to be in place before the end of this academic year. And then you get support for 1 year as $28,000. So once again, a very generous, very handsome stipend that's available to allow you to work on completing your dissertation. And then finally, what would be most interesting for those of you who are here today, the idea of postdoctoral support. So once you've actually completed your dissertation, which is a fantastic accomplishment, that's great. But then you have to actually go out and earn a living. At that point, you have to actually move into an academic job if that's the career path that you're on. And the Ford Foundation, once again, provides funding for people who are moving in that direction. So once again, there are criteria that you have to meet in terms of where you are in terms of your career. And support is actually quite impressive. It's nothing but a for 1 year. So you get a nice kind of bump in terms of being able to go from, well, what you're making as a graduate student to moving towards what you'd be making as a member of the faculty. So that kind of starts moving you in that direction of being able to support yourself during the first year of having completed your PhD.
Dr. Cruz, quick question. Do you know if a student who gets, like, maybe for a student here who gets a dissertation fellowship would also be eligible for a postdoctoral fellowship? Can you double up like that, like have one and then apply and get a second one?
I believe that is the case because the programs are run separately and administered separately. So you could be, yeah, I believe you could probably receive more than one award from the foundation. Yeah.
I wish I had known about this when I was doing my dissertation and afterwards.
There you go. So,
thank you.
We're all into that, right? Okay. So what other points we have to worry about with regard to who's eligible? So there are fields in study that the Foreign Financial supports. And basically, it supports the vast majority of programs that we have at school, like University of Memphis: science, technology, engineering, mathematics, what are often referred to as the STEM programs, but also crucial in social sciences, humanities, and education. Interestingly, and I've mentioned this a couple of times now, we've had just two Foreign Foundation fellows in the past. They were both from the Department of English. So a lot of people think, well, Foreign Foundation, that's for people in STEM. But it turns out that a lot of the people who get the awards are in humanities. And I'll come back and say a bit more about humanities towards the end as well. So it's important to realize that these groups are afterthoughts after STEM. They're actually a really important part of the program's support. The only fields that are eligible are ones that are primarily focused on what are referred to as practice-oriented professions. I would assume things like nursing or a doctor of social work, those kinds of programs. Those would be the ones. Ones not leading directly to a career in teaching academia are the ones that are not supported by the fellowship. If you're interested in the program and have questions about your eligibility, I'm going to have a slide later on about who you can contact, find out more about that. I saw some hands, yes.
Question. I know that you had PhD there, so if you were in education and you did a PhD, you would need to apply.
My understanding is that EdDs are fine if you're planning to go into an academic career. That's my understanding anyway. So yeah. So, yes.
Did you say that is
I don't believe doctoral social work is eligible, but once again, there's maybe contact find out about that for certain. So I think it's primarily a practice degree, and there might be some eligibility over there, but you can follow somebody at the Full Foundation if you're interested. So sure.
Is the funding that's given, they did include, you have to utilize their funding to provide
I'm assuming that you can, but I don't think it's required or anything like that. So, yeah. Well, we use for living expenses, that's what the second refers to. So that would be anything having to do with keeping body and soul together and actually finish your work. So yeah. Yes.
The eligibility about US nationals and citizens, I don't know if that also applies to international students eligibility.
I think it probably excludes most categories for international students, depending upon their actual residency in this country. But once again, I would follow up if you're interested. If there is this, we can kind of have to see. You can describe your exact case to them, and they can tell you, about your eligibility. I would think. Yes. So you're in CPLS? Is that the college you're in?
No.
The College of Liberal Arts.
Liberal Studies.
Yeah, that's it. University College. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think once again, as long as it's an academic program leading towards possibly going to academia, that would be eligible. That's my understanding. So that would fall under social science and broadly academic or humanities, depending upon what part of the CPLS you're in. So I would think that qualifies. Yeah. So I'm going to talk about the parts of the application for the Foreign Foundation fellowships. But this applies very broadly to any kind of fellowships you might be applying for. So a lot of this it would also, most foundation fellowships have very similar kind of kinds of requests and guidelines, and so this is going to be true more broadly as well. They all require some kind of personal statement. And the crucial issue for the Foreign Foundation is that they want to really assist with engaging with communities that are underrepresented in the academy. Now, underrepresentation can mean a variety of different things. It can mean different disadvantaged groups or different groups that have been not traditionally represented in academia. You may belong to such a group yourself, or you may work with a group that is in that category. So it's actually kind of a broad, nebulous sort of criterion. And you might think, well, gee, biology, I work with flatworms, that doesn't really apply. Well, it could apply if it turns out that you want to do that kind of work, let's say, at an inner city high school to kind of teach students about intro biology. So you can imagine taking even very basic research ideas and then showing how they can be involved in communities that have traditionally been underrepresented in higher education. You can find different ways of linking your research to those kinds of ideas and projects. And so that can be done. It may not be obvious that that's the case, but that can, in fact, be a way to create eligibility for this kind of award. So once again, the Four Foundation is trying to make sure that groups who have traditionally kind of been excluded from higher education in this country have more representation. So that's a really important part. We want to stress a statement like this. And then talk about your service efforts. It might be maybe tutoring or leadership or being involved in service projects. There's lots of different ways to demonstrate that you have to commitment to helping out the communities that you would like to assist with. So pointing to things you've accomplished in the past would be a really important part of this process. Then they want to hear about what you've accomplished as a scholar. And so you should mention all research experiences you've had, either part of your classwork, which is true in some disciplines, but also more broadly, kind of research that you're doing, for example, on your master's thesis or on your dissertation. If you've been involved in any kind of summer programs, that would all be things to talk about. And then importantly, the goals, the results, and the impacts of this research. You really want to try to make it clear that this isn't just, you're just doing things because you find it fascinating. There's actually some sort of value to society for being involved in this kind of work. And obviously, if you have any kinds of publications or presentations that have come out of this work, that's really important to be able to emphasize as well. Saying that you're able to present at a conference, and many conferences right now are virtual, but you can still present them, and so that you obviously should be pursuing those avenues for visibility, for networking, and you want to emphasize that here as well. And then you should describe your plan. So once again, depending upon where you are right now in your career, this is going to vary. If you are just beginning working on your dissertation, you want to describe where you see that project going and what your timeline is for completing it. And then more broadly, talking about your long-term goals as an academician. How the fellowship would advance your career as you move into, let's say, a tenure-track job at a college or at a university. And then once you kind of plug this into the larger whole, the idea that the research that you're engaged in is going to have some beneficial effect for society, for the community. And once again, even very basic research can fit into this category if you're turning around and really making that work available as teaching for groups of various sorts. So there are different ways to kind of finesse this, even if your work is very, very basic, not applied. You can find ways to make those kinds of connections. And this is really important. I see this a whole lot in any kind of plan that students tend to write. You don't get very specific. And the more you can point to specific accomplishments, the better off you are. You don't say, well, I went to a conference and I made a presentation. You would say at the 2021 conference on flatworm research, I was invited to be part of a symposium on the future of flatworms. I don't know why I'm picking up flatworms. I have no idea. But you want to be very specific about what you've actually done. And then you want to avoid excessive jargon. This is actually really important because as you become the world-class expert in your field, you start thinking in jargon. You become very attached to the fact the rest of the world doesn't know, for example, flatworm anatomy. And so you just kind of assume, well, I refer to this, refer to that. You have to be very clear to people who are not in your research area what you're talking about. So really trying to avoid jargon. That's really an important thing to do in general in presentations and talks, because a lot of times people are so wrapped up in the jargon of their subfield, they forget the rest of us don't know that vocabulary. And so kind of dumb it down, if you will, for a committee who's going to be reading this and has to understand it at the end of the day. I serve on committees in the College of Arts and Sciences in which we make awards for travel to students and faculty, and also give them leaves, faculty leaves, what are referred to as professional development awards, like sabbaticals, essentially. And some people in some disciplines will write these incredibly detailed but incomprehensible accounts of their research. I don't want to point at any particular discipline, but I'll just use one as an example. Mathematicians will sometimes assume that you know a whole lot more about math than you actually do. So referring to extremely abstract, jargon-laden programs, which are undoubtedly very important in your area, really makes it hard for anybody to give you money because they don't understand what you're talking about. So it really is kind of incumbent upon you to really dumb down what you're talking about, to explain your research in a way that's comprehensible to somebody who doesn't have background in that field. Developing this skill will take you a long way in your professional career. You should work on what's called your elevator pitch. If all you have is enough time to travel with somebody in an elevator, how would you describe your work? In like a half a minute, could you actually make what you're doing for your dissertation comprehensible to somebody else with no background? It's actually really hard to do, but you should think about doing it because it's going to help you in your career, and it's going to help you crucially, something like this to kind of get you away from thinking about jargon and really trying to explain things in a more straightforward, simple sort of way. If you are applying for a postdoctoral fellowship, you have an additional thing you have to think about, which is this idea that you want to actually go someplace else in most cases and do that research at this other place. It's referred to as the host institution. It can be the same university that you got your doctorate from, but the whole point is to try to enrich your academic experience. So it's much better to find other places to do this work. Now, you might be thinking that sounds really hard to do, but it's actually really pretty easy. Identify maybe a half dozen labs or departments in your field where people are doing very interesting research, and write to them and say, gee, if I came with my own money, could I hang out in your lab for a year? Or can I have an office at your university for a year? People love the idea of having scholars with their own money come in and kind of fertilize and cross-pollinate with their students and their faculty. So this may seem like a big hurdle to cross, but in fact, most people will be very eager to accept a foreign fellow into their lab or into their department for a year as a visitor, because it's not costing them anything, and you're able to enrich that program for that period of time. So obviously a really great incentive for the host institution. So keep that in mind, and there are different places you can do this. You can do it at a university, which is how it's normally done, but hospitals, libraries, museums, those are all possible places you can do this as well. If you study, being a conservator, the idea of being at a museum makes perfect sense. So you can find ways to connect to both traditional academia and also some less traditional routes as well. This was easy for short. You want to provide annotated bibliography if you're applying for a dissertation or a postdoctoral support. You simply list some sources that you have used in terms of the research program that you have been working in. So this kind of gives you information about the kinds of scholarship in your field. And then, like most applications, there are a variety of supplementary materials you have to provide. And once again, this is true across a wide variety of fellowships you might apply for. Typically, you have to have transcripts. If you are applying for postdoctoral support, you have to verify that in fact you did get your degree from the university or about to. Whereas the recommendations you're going to come back to in a moment, so it's really, really important. And then a letter for postdoctoral applicants from the host saying, yes, so-and-so is going to come and drive my flat room lab for a year, and we're happy to have them, that kind of thing. So very simple statement saying that you could then hang out at this other place for that year of postdoctoral study. So you are allowed to submit unofficial transcripts, at least initially. And then you, for the pre-doctoral dissertation, you have to describe your undergraduate and graduate coursework. Postdoctoral, you want to show the course you've taken in your doctoral program, is that kind of thing to kind of document your academic training. And then there are some additional forms, one that is signed by your advisor or department chair. And once again, it takes to some degree depending upon which kind of fellowship you are applying for. This is kind of a kicker. This is the thing that might take you most amount of time or cause you most amount of anxiety in this whole process. You have to find a number of other people say nice things about you. And not just your spouse or your friend or your neighbor, but actually people in academia who know you. And they ask for a minimum of 3. You can do as many as 5. So there are a couple of people you can obviously turn to. Your advisor should hopefully be very happy to write a letter for you. But other people, for example, who run your master's thesis committee or who are currently on your dissertation committee, and maybe an undergraduate advisor, somebody who you worked with before you began graduate work. These are all possible people to ask. So you want to ask people who have a background in your area, the closer the better, and people who know you well. So it's going to primarily be members, faculty in your department. That's going to be primarily where these sources come from. There could be other places as well. That's going to be the primary case for most people who are applying. So, and there's information about exactly how that process works, but that's really kind of the crucial thing for that part of the application. And then information about things that will appear in the letter from the host, the person, if you're applying for a postdoctoral fellowship, who would be supplying that support for you at that other institution. So how to do this? If you're really interested in this, and it sounds like it's meeting with what you would like to do, we're going to start working on this relatively early. You can register for foundation, or for that matter, any other kind of foundation that you might be applying for. And then you want to go to their websites and follow their information. The Ford Foundation is really good about providing lots of online support documents and help. They have FAQ resources, really quite good about making sure that everything is very clear in terms of eligibility, in terms of what is acceptable in terms of domains and search and things like that. So lots of information there. And once again, there's also ways to ask them, reach out and ask for help if you need that. And it's really important that you proofread what you're submitting. This may go without saying, but it is impossible to catch errors in your own writing. It's just the way your mind works. You actually can put in words that aren't really there. When I write things, I will have Microsoft Word read document back to me out loud, because Microsoft Word doesn't put in words that are missing. You'll hear them. And that's actually a really helpful tip for writing in general, is actually having your work proofread by a mechanical voice that's not putting in things that aren't there, And then you have other human beings do this as well. Not necessarily maybe your neighbor or friend, but maybe somebody like your advisor would be a really good move in terms of giving you guidance and feedback for what kind of writing would be appropriate for the essays involved for fellowship applications of this type, because they're familiar with what people expect to see in these kinds of applications. So crucially, getting feedback from advisors, mentors, and colleagues is really quite crucial. And if you're interested in applying for this cycle, which once again, deadline in December, you want to start that very, very soon to be able to make that happen by the deadlines. So it's really important, especially if you have letter writers, that you contact them early. And most faculty are overcommitted by definition. The earlier you ask people, the more likely they are to say yes. If you walk into me right now and said, could you write me a letter for December? I'd say, oh, of course, that's months from now. I'm happy to agree. But if it were a week before the deadline, my chances of saying yes would be around 0, because I'm just thinking, there's no way I could possibly do it. But right now, I'm imagining all this free time I'm going to have between now and December. I won't really have it. If I have this idea in my mind, I'd be happy to write you a letter. So if you approach people early, they're going to have that fantasy in mind and having plenty of time, and they'll actually then be committed to doing it for you. So once again, all of this is being done online, and you want to submit all documentation exactly as asked for, PDF, typically what the Ford Foundation requests for these kinds of things. And here's the crucial slide in terms of the time frame for this. Once again, there are different kinds of awards. There's 3 of them. Pre-doctoral awards, mid-December. They actually give the actual hour of day that the portal closes, 5 p.m. EST on January 16th. So that's pre-doctoral. Dissertation and postdoctoral are a few days earlier, like a week earlier on December 9th. And supplementary materials are requested a bit later. They're due early January. And they're really, most foundations are like this. They're very clear. You really can't ask for forgiveness by being late. These are very firm deadlines. The awards are very competitive. Many people who are applying, and they have to really be quite strict about cutting things off right when they are in fact due. So once again, and we'll have this information, I'll send the slides out to you later today. There's the website, and there is the email and phone number of somebody who will answer questions about eligibility, areas of research, those sorts of things. They're happy to talk to you and assist if you require that assistance. So what I've described to you is the Ford Foundation, but keep in mind this is just one of many different fellowships and awards that you might be eligible for. Most students never think about this, and they really ought to, because if you apply to enough of these, simply by the law of averages, you might be able to find funding, get funding from one of these sources. So some units in the university actually have lots of online information about this, and this is just a slide that I pulled from the Marcus Ora Center for Humanities, which is part of the College of Arts and Sciences, my college. But there are other resources online as well. They have a list that goes on, actually quite down towards the bottom of the floor here, of different kinds of funding. And this is all listed in the humanities. There also be funding, of course, across all the STEM fields, and many other fields as well, education, for example. So, go online and look for these things. Just type in University of Memphis Fellowships. You'll get pages like this, lots of places to apply. Doing it early, you can find out what deadlines are, and then make it possible to actually do this. But talk to your advisor, talk to the faculty in your department, because they know about these things, about certain kinds of awards that are available in certain departments. And therefore, they can really tell you, oh, well, there's a whole flatworm society, and they give money every year. Being aware of these things is actually really, really good. And they can only find out if you are proactive and ask people for that information. So be aware of all of that. And I think, yes, I am done. Are there any questions?
Are there any questions in the chat, Casey? Do you have? Well, I have a question actually.
Okay.
Do you know of any support services on campus that can help you with the document writing process? I mean, the CWC, with all their services, can offer some limited editorial help. Are there any specific offices on campus to help with preparing grants? Because those can be very challenging.
Yeah, if you're applying for an actual grant, there's a whole office-sponsored programs that work somewhat differently from fellowships, for example. But if you were applying, for example, for funding from the National Science Foundation, there's a whole separate system, a whole internal system called CAIUS you have to go through. So that is something to talk to your advisor about in terms of getting guidance for other kinds of things you might be applying for.
All right, well, thank you. And sorry, I mispronounced your name.
That's okay.
It's Dr. Cruz, not Kreuz. So thank you for this. And I might actually be in touch with you because I am imagining, as part of the expansion of the DWR, incorporating more information about applying for fellowships, grants, anything that involves money, because it is, as we keep saying, something to be thinking about even as you're writing your dissertation. So thank you very much for all that. Yes. And our lunch is here, and they're right back there along with some water and other various things. So we'll be back with the talk from Will Duffy at 1 o'clock, and please feel free to grab lunch and chat amongst yourselves.